watching the NewsHour Agenda. I'm Padmaja Joshi. Now, here is what has happened over the last few hours. After suffering close to 200 casualties, Ukraine in the evening offered to conduct talks with Russia, an offer that was accepted by Moscow, and it will be sending a delegation to Minsk tomorrow. However, soon after, things took quite a curious turn, where within hours of saying that he's ready for talks, Russian President Vladimir Putin got on TV and urged Ukrainian troops to take control, basically asking them to stage a coup. In fact, Putin was also unsparing of the Ukrainian government in his address on the security situation, where he said that the Ukrainian government is a band of drug addicts and neo-Nazis, telling the Ukrainian army that they should take the power in their hands, and that's the only way to keep the civilians safe, who otherwise are being used as human shields. In fact, he even said that if it really came to talks, Russia is much more comfortable talking to the Ukrainian army than to the Ukrainian government.
Еще раз обращаюсь к военнослужащим вооруженных сил Украины. Не позволяйте неонацистам и бендеровцам использовать ваших детей, ваших жен и стариков в качестве живого щита. Берите власть в свои руки. Похоже, нам с вами будет легче договориться, чем с этой шайкой наркоманов и неонацистов, которая засела в Киеве и взяла в заложники весь украинский народ.
Всем гражданам Российской Федерации, которые выходят на протесты, хочу сказать: мы вас видим. Это значит, что вы нас услышали. Это значит, вы нам начинаете верить. Боритесь за нас, боритесь против войны.
We will see, depending on the circumstances. As President Putin said, he reaffirmed one more time that we are interested in seeing Ukrainian people independent. We want them to have the government that would represent all the people in all their versatility. And we don't want to have a situation when it is run from abroad.
Now, of course, you heard this day-long back and forth and name-calling that took place between the two countries, essentially saying that you are responsible for any loss of life. So what actually is going to happen tomorrow? Will there be talks, or will Russia topple the Ukrainian government? What is going on in Putin's mind? Is there a possibility that, given that the Russian troops have stopped just short of hoisting the Russian flag over Ukraine's parliament, maybe there could be a bloodless transfer of power?
You're watching the News Hour at 10, debate number 1 on Times Now, Super Prime Time.
Joining us now is Alexander Khebet. He is a journalist joining us from Ukraine. Tatiana Kukhareva is a journalist joining us from Moscow. My first question, though, is to senior fellow at the ORF, Sushant Sareen. What do you think Putin is going to do, Sushant Sareen? Is he going to go for talks?
Padmaja, even if he is going to go for talks, I suspect that that's going to be a deflection. I think he's more or less made up his mind that he wants a regime change. I think he's made up his mind that Russia wants, and they've declared that objective, a demilitarized Ukraine, and which is what makes his faith in the Ukrainian army so touching. But if you want to demilitarize Ukraine, then, there are certain repercussions and consequences of that. He wants Ukraine to come under the Russian sphere of influence. He has said that I will not allow you any kind of NATO expansion. Basically, I think the template we are seeing play out is what we've seen in the past.
So
Hungary,
basically,
Czechoslovakia, a number
an
of
elaborate
others.
diversion. Would it be safe to say it's an elaborate diversion at best?
I suspect that it is going to be something like that. I don't see any logic, although I don't see any logic in the invasion also. But I don't see any logic that having started the invasion, having, cocked the snook at the entire world and done whatever he has done, to stop now and say, okay, fine, let's get into negotiations.
So then answer this, Captain Alok Bansal, then why haven't they gone the whole hog? They are some 10.2 kilometers away from the Ukraine parliament. Why are they waiting?
See, what they have said that they are willing to negotiate, I think they are going to negotiate with the gun pointed to their heads. They have not stopped the aggression completely. So they are surrounding the Kyiv. And I think by the time the negotiations start, I think Ukrainian leadership may not have too many options. And I have always said right from the beginning that Putin's objective in Ukraine is to bring about a leadership change, bring about a government that's willing to accept Russia's domination. He's also talked of disintegration of Soviet Union being a catastrophic mistake.
Okay, so if regime change is the idea, Ms. Kukhareva, then why this entire talk of let's send a delegation, we are going to talks?
Well, we were going to talks until the Ukrainian side decided to, to kind of withdraw the offer. And there've been mixed messages coming from Ukraine because on one hand, Zelensky says he's willing to talk, and then his team says a different thing, which is what our authorities have been announcing very vocally. We're ready for talks. The problem is,
but how can you have talks when 2 hours after agreeing to talks, your president called Ukrainian government a band of drug addicts and neo-Nazis?
That's not quite the right timing. However, look, we've gotten incredibly disturbing pictures from Ukraine. We've been getting them this whole day. The Ukrainian army, well, obviously the Ukrainian leadership has ordered a placement of multiple rocket launchers. They're being placed in residential areas. We have pictures of that. We've actually published those pictures. Those pictures have been authenticated by people, civilians who live in Kharkov and in Kyiv. And what is that, as a tactic? I've heard multiple accusations today, watching the Indian broadcasts, actually. They're accusing Russia of killing civilians, and yet, in the same time, they're starting fire from civilian areas in Kyiv.
Interesting. Would you want to respond to that? Essentially, you're being accused of doing what Palestine was accused of doing, of using civilians as a human shield.
Yes, I would like to really respond because this is not true. Sorry. Just right now, it was a huge siren. Maybe you couldn't hear it, or maybe not. I don't know. But these words from a Russian colleague, I would say, even maybe not a colleague, but a propagandist. So Ukrainian army doesn't strike for the Russian positions from the governmental area, from the inhabited area, really, because we are watching all of those news here, and we are just checking. Me and my team in ZN.ua, we are checking every single footage and every single picture, and we're trying to expose all of those fakes spreading by Russian state media, by Russian agencies.
Are you saying, sir, that what Russia is saying, that you have set up guns and you have set up weapons in civilian areas, is a falsehood?
No, it was the armor given to the civilians, around 18,000 weapons around the country, not only in Kyiv, but it's not the only regular civilians, I don't know, any passing by person outside of the street. It's the people who are voluntarily are going to join the territorial defense unit.
No, we've got images of citizens taking weapons voluntarily, but it's different. You're being accused of putting up artillery guns in civilian areas.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. There is no artillery in the civilian area, in Ukrainian control area. It was listen, it was I was born in Donetsk, and I fled this area in 2014, and all of those things Russia is trying to repeat right now is just reflecting on what they are really doing. And usually in Donetsk, it was like a lot of footages on the internet. Just go and Google it. Come
Ms.
on.
Kukhareva, basically your claims have been called a flat lie.
Well, I don't know what to tell you because, you know, I have proof of those claims. I have pictures if you want me to send them to you.
Can you show us right now? What pictures?
Of course I can. 1 second. Wait a second. I'll find them because we got them in the morning from Kharkiv. And also the president's spokesman just announced that while the Ukrainian leadership took this pause, I'm sorry, I'm scrolling for pictures down on my laptop.
So, what do you make of this? Now, Russia is essentially saying that the war crimes are being committed by Ukraine.
Padmaja, I'm not going to get into these accusations and counter-accusations because we are in the fog of war. There will be these kind of charges coming from both sides. Trying to take the high moral ground. And frankly speaking, while one understands Russia's very serious security concerns, the fact of the matter remains that, actually invading another country is probably not the best way to go about addressing your security concerns.
Ma'am, we can see the pictures that you're showing. We can see the pictures. Can you tell us what are your claims about these pictures, Ms. Kukhareva?
There are the pictures. You can see the rounded with red. These are Grad missile launchers. There are multiple. These are the tanks with Ukrainian flags, and this is the center of Kharkiv, where people live. We've authenticated these pictures via local people, via civilians living in Kharkiv. We obviously have people on the ground as well. And also just now the president's spokesman actually addressed the journalists, and he told us that, while the Ukrainian side took a so-called pause in deciding whether they want to negotiate because they refused to negotiate in Minsk, now they want to go to Warsaw. And while they're pausing, they've started artillery fire from those residential areas. Again, Russia, from the beginning, we have said that Russian military is not bombing civilians. These are not our targets. There is no other way. My Ukrainian counterpart says he's from Donetsk, but he fled Donetsk. Why did you flee Donetsk? This is my question.
This is the most stupid question ever. The most stupid question ever. Because your soldiers came to capture and occupy the territory of the sovereign
Are you saying that there were
states.
Russian soldiers in Donetsk? Seriously?
Completely. Come on. This is a bullshit. I don't want to even talk about this to you. Come on. This is a gross. Absolutely. Fool.
That's brilliant, you calling yourself a journalist and swearing on air. However, this is adorable. I actually covered Ukraine back in 2014. I had people on the ground there as well, my colleagues who were following the Donbass conflict. And the accusations of Russian soldiers in Donbass back in 2014, are you also saying that there were Russian soldiers in Odessa, in Mariupol, in Kharkiv, all of the cities that revolted against what was happening?
We are talking about only Donbass right now, not talking about Odessa back in 2014. Yeah? Just don't mix it up. Or better learn geography.
Why? This is Eastern Ukraine. Look, we're talking about Eastern Ukraine.
Odessa is not
Russian
Eastern Ukraine. Odessa is the southwest of Ukraine. Learn geography, please.
See, now you're just being rude.
Okay. Be that as it may, there is unanimity on one thing. When you say that there is no damage to civilian areas, ma'am, we have pictures which are on air. There are pictures which we have seen through the day where there are civilian buildings that are shelled, reduced to rubble. We have seen bloodied civilians through the day. So that cannot be denied. Invading a country cannot be a reaction to not talking. There is an invasion, you'll agree.
Country is a reaction to not talking, is a reaction to 8 years of shelling, of killing people in Donetsk and Lugansk. If you see, my Ukrainian colleague still hasn't answered the question properly, why he fled Donetsk. He's saying he fled Russian soldiers who were never there. However, there were 8 years of Ukrainian army shelling Donetsk and shelling Lugansk regions and killing people,
you're giving the time for the proper and pure propaganda over for your big and huge audience in India. Like, you have to check your guess pretty well, because this is insane. Like, these fakes, the Russian troops are not there since 2014, are being exposed thousands of times.
How would you know? You're not there.
No, but you know, this is beyond propaganda. And why I say this is because today Russia, Mr. Krebet, actually handed over evidence of what they say is Kyiv's war crimes in Donbass to France. This was done officially at a diplomatic level. What do you make of that? So they went to France and they said this is the evidence.
Ukrainian authorities all the time since 2014, and Ukrainian and international human rights activists and their organization are reporting really and concerning reports from the human rights oppressions in Crimea occupied by Russia, in Donetsk part occupied by Russia, in Luhansk part occupied by Russia. Like, it's a multiple, also thousands of people, prisoners of war. And the political prisoners of Ukrainians are in the Russian jails, in occupied territories jails. They've been tortured. Everybody is reporting on it, and Ukrainian government and Ukrainian authorities make a lot of lawsuits against Russia because of the.
So explain this to us, Captain Alok Bansal. Does this get Russia any slack? That they say that, listen, we've given evidence to France and perhaps they will also give it to other countries of what they claim is war crimes.
See, till the invasion started, Russia had a lot of solid grounds to complain about Ukraine's behavior, not adhering to Minsk agreement, the eastward expansion of NATO against the assurances that were given to Russia during the Soviet period. But with invasion, actually, that sort of excuses which were available have probably vanished, because it's a naked aggression, and the aggression is not even confined to Donbass or to Crimea. It's actually an attack for Kyiv, and that's coming from Belarus. So to my mind, at this point of time, what Russia wants to achieve is a quick change of government in Kyiv. And the way I think the battle has progressed, I'll not be surprised if Kyiv falls within 24 to 48 hours. And if Kyiv falls, it should not be a problem for Russia to install a government of its choice in Kyiv. Maybe somebody like former President Viktor Yanukovych, who is actually living in Russia, could be brought back because he was an elected president removed unconstitutionally in 2014. So that could be done. Even if they negotiate, I think one of the key ingredients of that negotiations would be that the present dispensation, political dispensation, needs to go. That's a given.
Okay, this is a given. Andreas Umlund, analyst at the Stockholm Center for Eastern Studies at the Swedish Institute of International Affairs, is also live with us from Stockholm. Mr. Umlund, your analysis, how long do you think the resistance can hold out in Ukraine?
Well, I think the resistance will hold out as long as Russians are there. Ukrainians are not used to having an imposed ruler. Ukrainians voted out their first president in 1994. They also voted out the last president, Petro Poroshenko, and put instead a Jewish-born president, Volodymyr Zelensky, into power. They will not accept some sort of Russian ruler. They will fight till the end. And with all due respect, the director of the India Foundation seems to have watched a little bit too much Russian television. You should watch maybe other Russian, let's say non-state Russian television, or maybe even Ukrainian television. What you're telling us here is basically what the Russian state is saying. And what the lady has been saying, you know, I mean, in 1992, the commander of the 14th Russian Army, Alexander Lebed, when the Russian army got involved in an inner Moldovan conflict 30 years ago, said that he had to become active, that his army had to become active because the government in Chisinau, in the capital of Moldova, is worse than the SS, the German SS of the Nazis.
Okay.
And now we've been hearing these stories for 30 years. And in a way, the conclusion from all of this is that the Russians are a really unhappy country because they are surrounded by fascists. Fascists in the Baltics, fascists in Moldova, fascists in Georgia, fascists in Ukraine, everywhere fascists, and the pure Russians are just defending themselves. I mean, if you want to listen to these fairy tales about the genocide and the Nazis and whatnot, I mean, that's your decision. It's a justification for an imperialist war.
You really have set the cat among the pigeons. I think it's only fair that Captain Bansal respond first, and then I'll go to Mr. Kukhareva. Captain Bansal.
See, I am not accepting Putin's description of Ukraine as a Nazi state. I think that's unacceptable, and I have never said so, irrespective of what SIPRI director feels. I have only said that Russia did have some genuine grouses which could have been justified till recently. But this sort of a naked aggression against Ukraine is not justifiable under present international norms anywhere. So that being the case, I do not justify Russia's aggression. But having said that, what I perceive as US-Russian objective is to change the regime in Kyiv. And while Ukrainians may fight till cows come home, but I don't think so the city of Kyiv is going to hold on for too long. And I think that is where I think tactically the Russians have played a very good game by targeting Ukraine from Belarus. And that actually allows them to capture the capital. The fighting in the interiors may continue, but if they install a puppet government in Kyiv, then the legitimacy of the resistance gets compromised.
Mr. Amland, isn't that a realistic assessment given the kind of reverses that Ukraine has faced in just the last 24 hours? And Russia has made it clear, we want a regime change, and Ukraine is outnumbered.
I mean, you can install a terrorist occupation regime that would have to kill people, to imprison people. Yes, you can do that. But even for that, you will have to, basically the whole Russian National Guard would have to be transferred from Russia to Ukraine. This is not going to work. And, this is the most surprising of this whole operation. It's not clear what the end game is. How is it going to be ending? What is the plan? There's not going to be a return of Yanukovych or some sort of other sort of puppet regime. The Ukrainians will simply not, nobody will work for this regime. They will fight it to the end. The Ukrainian anthem says we're gonna sacrifice our bodies and our souls for our freedom, and that's what they're gonna do.
Respond to what was said, that you want to install a regime that is under your thumb. It's fine, but don't pretend that you're doing it to overturn some fascists.
Well, look, first of all, I personally don't want to install anything in Ukraine. I've been there quite a few times. Back in the days, I actually grew up in Crimea, so I find the claims made by my Ukrainian counterpart really offensive. Especially talking about Russian occupation of the Russian region that Crimea always was. Ever since I was little, there was not a single bus stop in Sevastopol that did not include the graffiti saying Crimea is Russia. I'm sorry to say that, but that's just nonsense that you're talking about occupation. The whole region voted to rejoin the country, and they were happily accepted. This was done completely according to international law, and that region is and will be Russian. As opposed to, when we're talking about installing regimes and there not being any Nazi or neo-Nazi elements in Kyiv, this is again a pile of nonsense. If you remember correctly, for instance, I'm sure that my Ukrainian colleague doesn't know about it because he's obviously pro-Kyiv regime. However, in 2014-15, Ukraine was more dangerous than Syria to journalists. Do you remember those rates? Those.
I don't think he does because he's shaking his head.
You should not shake your head because those are European assessments, not Russian. Those are European lists and European ratings. The number of journalists murdered in Kyiv for just not supporting the regime that came to power in 2014 is appalling. My colleague was actually put in prison for being a Russian journalist in Ukraine back then, in those years. And he spent quite some time there until we managed to get him back. It is a nationalist and neo-Nazi regime, and it has been since Maidan. You want to remember about the number of people that were shot during the Maidan? Do you remember that? Do you remember how journalists were being shot at? The snipers in Kyiv on Maidan? The completely illegal coup d'etat that you're now saying that, well, no, that didn't happen. There were no...
As in Georgia, as in the Baltics, as in Moldova, you know, all of these countries are fascist. The pure Russians are surrounded by fascists.
We're not talking about those.
We should send care packages to Russia.
Did not support sanctions. Georgia, for instance, did not even support the sanctions against Russia.
Okay, it's interesting that this name calling and back and forth is getting sharper, and it will get even sharper in the next few days because the overt, the overt aggression seems to have tapered down a little bit, but it is this accusation and counter-accusation which is becoming more heated. So Shan Sareen, however, the interesting thing is news just coming in that Moscow has said we are going to impose counter-sanctions against the West to hit its weak spots. Is this the reason that Russia is hurting because of the sanctions that have been put not just on the country but a specific set of its leadership?
Look, it will hurt some of those people, you know, the people who've been named in those sanctions. I think some of the sanctions which have been unveiled since yesterday are going to bite Russia. But the important thing is that the sanctions which will really hurt Russia will also hurt Europe. And out there, for all the grandstanding which many of the European countries are doing, they're careful to try and protect their own interests, which is quite understandable. See, the problem is, Padmaja, that, you know, people like Captain Bansal and me, we are, you know, we are sitting in India and we are watching all sorts of information coming in. And, you know, I think it's a silly accusation that we are watching only Russian channels. We are watching also, I don't think hardly anybody is watching any Russian channel. But, you know, please understand that we have our own agency. We can make up our own mind and we make up our own assessments. You might not agree with the assessment, but to, you know, hurl these kind of accusations, I think it's rather puerile. But the fact of the matter remains that the Russians will want to impose certain counter sanctions on the on many of the European countries, and this process is going to continue. But I agree that what the end game is going to be is not clear. It's going to remain messy because if the Russians want to install a puppet regime in Ukraine, its acceptability will always be questionable. There will always be unrest out there. There will be other countries and powers which will try and foment dissent, which will try and foment trouble inside Ukraine to not let the Russian supported regime stabilize out there. I think so. It's going to become a very, very messy thing going forward. And I don't really see any kind of a very clear-cut end game emerging, at least not at this point in time.
All right. Is the end game a little foggy, Ms. Kukhareva, which is why Russia is not actually marching in to do what many thought was a given today itself?
Well, you say it's a given, and yet neither the Russian president nor the Ministry for Defense never really said that the goal here is to march into Kyiv.
So what is the goal?
Well, I dare say that it would be a very weird question to ask the military during an operation that is ongoing. I do believe that they will announce it when they've actually achieved it. However, again,
Ma'am, as a journalist in the country, you would have a fair idea. Whenever there is a military operation, there is a clear idea on what its objective is. That's how military operations would be planned. So, which is why I was wondering if you would have information.
I think the objective here is diplomacy. I think the objective here is talks with the Ukrainian side. Because, look, we've had talks with Ukraine before. We had Minsk II agreements. They were never observed.
Ma'am, the cities are up in flames. How can you have talks when you're bombing a population?
We're not bombing the population. That's, again, you have no proof of civilians being specifically targeted. And that is quite a serious accusation, might I say, as well. Again,
it has been reiterated not by us, but it has been reiterated by the UN, by UK. Boris Johnson spoke about it. The United States has spoken about it. So it is an allegation or a charge that has been made, in addition, of course, to the pictures that we have of actual civilians who are injured.
You're very right. It has been reiterated by the US and by the UK, the same countries that were selling billions worth of guns and that were supplying money to Ukraine all these years in order to bomb civilian population of Donbass. Again, 200 military advisors, US military advisors that were ordered, and my Ukrainian counterpart can stop, whatever he's doing, because that whole thing, because again, those are American news. You can Google them. This is Bloomberg. These are legitimate American news. They ordered US advisors out of the country, which suggests that those advisors...
You're saying that the American channels are also doing propaganda. Final question I want to quickly address to Captain Alok Bansal. I'm a little confused because I was just told that the military operation is aimed at holding talks. How does that work?
See, basically, once you take military operations and occupy a superior position, you have a better advantage during talks. And while I tend to agree that Russians may not be keen to hurt the civilian population, because eventually they would want a disposition which is pro-Russian and is supported by the population. So their aim is not to target the population to that extent. And that's why President Putin has been making statements and appealing to Ukrainian population also. So their aim is probably to surround Kyiv and put pressure on Kyiv when they negotiate, so that they can force a regime change. And
well, the idea is to reach out to the population with 160 plus lives lost. That ship may just have sailed. But Andreas Umland, what do you make of Mr. Putin's offer to the Ukrainian army to take power in order to save the civilians, to save Ukrainian civilians? He's in fact even said, I'd much rather talk to the army than talk to this government of drug peddlers and neo-Nazis.
Yeah, the president of Ukraine is Jewish born and accused of being a neo-Nazi. Well, I mean, this call of Putin is a joke. The army, the political leadership, actually many of the military men have been criticizing Zelensky for being too dovish and not being hawkish enough in the past. So, I mean, he's playing just with the fact that people know very little about Ukraine, and then like Mrs. Kukhareva, they're telling all sorts of stories. That there's a Nazi regime, that civilians are bombed, that the Ukrainian state is killing its own citizens. I mean, this is an authoritarian regime. Look at the Freedom House ratings. India is a democracy. Ukraine is a democracy. Russia is an authoritarian regime. Occupied Crimea is a totalitarian regime. Occupied Donbass is a totalitarian regime with torture prisons, with concentration camps. And here we have a propagandist saying all sorts of crazy stuff.
All right, I'll really have to step in at this point. Like Sushant Sareen said at the beginning, in the fog of war, there will be a lot of allegations flying back and forth. But one thing that cannot be denied is the human cost this has inflicted. Thank you very much, all gentlemen, and Tatiana Kukhareva for having joined me. Our thought remains with the civilians in Ukraine. We hope they stay safe. Thank you very much. In fact, it's also the fight back that cannot be discounted. A bunch of people who found themselves under attack suddenly. They woke up to shelling of their cities, and it took extraordinary courage for some of them to step up and say, we will go down, we may go down eventually, but we won't go down without a fight.
I can't believe this is happening. Like, fighter jets are literally not buzzing the city, but they're in the air above this space, and there hasn't been fighter planes here in years. And I really do believe that they've already dropped bombs in Kramatorsk. Like, I say I believe it because there's been huge explosions, which I don't think were from Arty. I didn't hear any incoming or anything, but just massive explosions.
Unbelievable. A sentiment that finds resonance across the very world as Russia continues to pulverize Ukraine. It is a battle between David and Goliath when it comes to military might, and Ukraine has been pretty much left to fend for itself.
Росії все одно доведеться рано чи пізно говорити з нами, говорити про те, як закінчити бойові дії і зупинити це вторгнення.
But the besieged country's forces are fighting back for their sovereignty and survival, not sparing the enemy.
Россиянам никто не рад.
Россиянам никто не рад.
Друзья, уезжайте отсюда, вам здесь не рады.
Кто конкретно? Кому? Кто должен уезжать? В камеру смотри. Кто должен уезжать? Говори.
Друзья мои.
Кто твои друзья? Откуда ты приехал?
Из Нижнего Новгорода.
Сейчас, подожди, я ближе.
The common man and woman on the street are also refusing to cow down, showing the same grit.
Вы враги.
Да.
И вы уже с этой секунды прокляты.
Да.
Я вам отвечаю.
Все. Теперь послушайте меня.
Я вас услышала.
Не будем усугублять ситуацию, пройдите.
А куда уже усугублять? Вы пришли, блядь, непрошенные твари. Конченые.
And standing with the people, shoulder to shoulder, are their parliamentary representatives.
So everybody in Ukraine who wants to fight will have a chance to. That gun you've seen, AK-47 that I'm holding there, is basically the weapons that me and most of the MPs went to get at the police stations around Kyiv. And basically our idea here is very simple. If this is our country and want to defend it, we need to do it ourselves.
I do have a weapon with me. All the members of parliament got it yesterday. We cannot be officially in the army or in territorial integrity because we are members of parliament. We have other obligations, but we are ready.
As Ukrainian diplomats plead with the world to halt Putin's aggression, the Russian forces advance undeterred. The strength of response may be insufficient, but it certainly won't be an abject surrender.